quite historic because it's in level 2 of COVID-19, and some of us are online and some of us are in the room. I'll ask Craig to open with a karakia, please, Craig.
Tēnā koutou e rau rangatira, kua tai mai nei. Kua tai mai nei ki tēnei hui o tātou. Te hui tuatahi o te kaunihera tai o i te ao hau. Te hui hei whakawhiti kōrero, e pāna te māhere a te tau tuatahi o tēnei kaunihera. Ka nui te mihi ki a koutou, e nā hau e whā, hei tonu ki a mātou i tēnei māhere, ki nā kaimahi, hei mahi ihu oni ki tēnei kaupapa, ki nā kai kaunihera, i kōrero hia ki tēnei māhere. Kia kaha, kia maia, kia manuanui koutou. Nō reira, kaua e wangawanga koutou, he waka eke no. Ki nā mate, kua wehi atu ki te pō haere hari atura. A rātou, kia rātou, tātou kia tātou te hunga ora, nō reira a tēnā koutou. So just a translation, just welcome to this first meeting in the new world, the new normal. First time that we've been back in person, some of us are still online, I acknowledge everyone. And also the first annual plan deliberations for this council. I acknowledge the individuals, the community groups and organisations that have made submissions and gave up their time to be heard and provide us feedback. To our staff who have worked hard in trying times to ensure the organisation kept moving, and in particular to keep our annual plan progressing to this point. To my fellow councillors who have also worked hard through the lockdown to keep things going. I note that I acknowledge you all for your commitment, and I note that we have a diversity of views, which is a strength. And I hope we can find the common ground that our region needs to move forward and help shape a thriving and resilient Canterbury for this and future generations. He karakia timatanga o tātou nei hui. Whakatake te hau ki te uru, whakatake te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, Councillor Pauling. Just some comments about, to follow on from that, as Craig has said, the purpose to consider feedback from the draft annual plan. And I would like to confirm and endorse Craig's comments that we are very grateful to all the community that came forward and made submissions to our annual plan and wrote in to us and expressed their point of view, because that is what democracy is, and that's how local government is supposed to work. So we very much appreciate all those people and organisations that came forward. Even though it was difficult having that engagement online, we look forward to a time in the future with our long-term plan where we'll be able to go out and have some lovely actual face-to-face human being stuff without the threat of COVID-19, and that won't be too long in the future, I'm sure. So just getting on to the rules of this meeting, please do not put any comments on chat. I view that as tantamount to a secondary conversation going on, and secondary conversations are not supposed to go on during a formal meeting. After all, this is a mini parliament in the government of New Zealand. Many people don't view it like that, but that's what it is. It helps make our country run, and it's more important now than ever given COVID-19. We all have to work together in the recovery and get the best outcome for everyone. So please don't use the chat function. And last week it worked really well. People only used it to move move it to indicate they want to speak, or to move and second resolutions. And if you want to vote against, we'll have the eyes on the voices, I think, or you can put that up online if you just want to write that in, but no other secondary chat, please. Right, I just want to start out by checking to make sure that you all have the correct documents and you have actually received them. They were circulated separately from the agenda, which was published online and which you all should have. Item 5.1 is a report from the Performance, Audit and Risk Committee. It's attachment to the financial summary. Item 6.1, deliberations on the draft annual plan, additional information on the public transport. If you haven't got either of those, or you haven't seen them, or you don't know what I'm talking about, you'd better put your hand up and tell me. I've got copies. We have copies. Sure. Yes, there are some people around the table that are getting a hard copy now. Are all the people online okay with their access to those documents? If not, please indicate. We'll just have to wait a minute while it gets handed out. So there might be a couple of delays like this. You'll just have to bear with us. All right, I can start going, I think. First of all, there is one apology that we have received, an apology from Councillor Tane Apanui, who has taken leave to do some family business. You're going to second that, or move it and second it. Moved by Councillor Clearwater, seconded by Councillor Pauling. That's accepted. Number 3, conflicts of interest. I'm not aware of any new conflicts of interest that have been received by the CEO's office or myself. Public forum, we do not have any requests at the moment for anybody to do public forums or deputations or any petitions being presented. Item 5 is committee reports. Performance, Audit and Risk Committee minutes of the 30th of April 2020. It's page 7 to 14 of the agenda. I'll ask Councillor John Sunkel to deliver that report, please, and to move the motions there, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I requested, I know this is a big day, requested that we bring this forward as we met on the 30th of April, and the next opportunity would be June to pass these minutes. My reasons for bringing this forward before I move to the recommendations are that the financial reports in that PAR committee meeting were pre-COVID reports. And due to COVID, those financials are vastly different to what they were. And assuming you have read the minutes, you will have noted on those financials, we've made the note that they are pre-COVID and should not be taken as the actual state of fact. So I wanted to ensure that those summaries are articulated to this council. And equally, we are about to move into the Audit New Zealand process, and Audit New Zealand have made it very clear in their documentation that they will be looking at our COVID processes, how we have made decisions, how we are assessing risk in association with COVID against business as usual. So again, I just want on record at this council that we are considering that we have considered that, and it is part of the work that we are required to do within the processes mandated. So it's just really to highlight that and bring it forward so that we have a clear record on file that can be presented to the auditors that we are giving due consideration to the risk of decision making, override and the like. So those are my opening comments. Should I put the motion first, or do we want to debate? No, sorry. We will put the motion that we receive and confirm the minutes of that committee meeting. If I could, I shall move. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Grant Hedge. Committee members, do you agree that these are a true and accurate record? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? It is carried. Questions?
Thank you for your report, John. I've got a question in relation to one of the bullet points at the top of page 11 of our agenda. And around there was an explanation given at your, in a briefing for when there's extra expenditure intended and the amount is outside the budget. Just wonder if you or one of the staff might kind of like clarify that for other members who went to the meeting too. Thanks.
Thank you for that question. Process is that we go through our annual plan, that the process that we have at this point in time, we have budgets, allocations are made. Where we have expenditure that sits outside of those budgets, opportunities arrive or overruns that are significant, that question can then be brought back to the Performance Audit and Risk Committee and asked, can we allow those funds to be spent? So it becomes a conversation within the PAR committee, verifying the process, the requirement and the need. And that is part of the conversation that we have had over the last few weeks when we've been debating the annual plan, where we're looking to almost revisit on a monthly basis our financial requirements, what the needs of recovery might be and the like. So if recovery projects come up, they would come to PAR. We accept as a council that's what we want to do. We validate that that is an appropriate expenditure. So it's a process to ensure that there is a clear trail of decision making, which we are perfectly entitled to do.
Thank you for the explanation, John.
We also have recommendations 2 and 3 that we receive the summary of the financial reports for the period ending 31st of March 2020 and that we note in option 3 the resolutions made by the committee under delegated authority. I would put those 2 recommendations. Do I have a seconder, please? Grant Edge, thank you. All those in favour?
Sorry, before we vote, can I just ask for a point of clarification?
Yes.
Just one moment. Could I remind members in the chamber to utilise the chat bar to indicate the desire to speak? We have members that are not in the chamber and cannot see your hands nor hear your voices. So in fairness to them, let's just use the same process. Thank you.
So, Councillor Sunkel, Councillor Mackay has a question.
Just a question of clarity regarding the financial summary. I think I saw the date 30th of the 4th on it. So that's an updated summary.
There has been a further summary circulated as to the 30th of April, which is an update from the information that was in the park report for the 30th of April meeting. So in effect, it is a month on.
Oh, okay. Can somebody get it for you? Oh, we've just got a little hiccup in here at the moment with someone's computer.
Thank you, Phil.
If anybody else has got a muck up around that, indicate and we'll get somebody to help you. Sorry, I can't help the people at home.
So we have the recommendations 2 and 3 moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Move back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor John. That was excellent. We're moving on forward now to number 6 on the agenda, matters for council decision. 6.1 is deliberations on the draft annual plan 2020-2021. You should be on page 15 to 93 of your agenda, plus the supplementary information on public transport, which was circulated on Tuesday evening. The recommendations that the CEO has provided to guide us through this are on page 15 of 95. The first recommendation is around that I'll read out, since this this is being recorded. I'm sorry, I forgot to confirm that at the start. The meeting is not being live streamed, but it will be recorded, with the recording to be made available on the council website. So sorry for that digression there. Recommendation 1, so I'll be reading these out so that if anyone's listening, they can follow what's going on. And they'll be taken separately. Thank you for that advice. The recommendations will be taken separately. I'm on recommendation 1 to start with. That recommendation is in which we are receiving the summary of the public engagement on the draft annual plan and staff advice, which is an attachment 1. And we will be considering whether we agree that the summary is an accurate reflection on the community feedback. Now, in order to do that, I would like to invite the lead councillors from each portfolio to give an overview of the community feedback received during our engagement. This is a means of publicly acknowledging the role and the importance of the people that are the citizens that I referred to earlier, and our colleague Councillor Pauling also referred to in his meeting at the start. It's really important that we remember that the public we are serving the public, and we want to acknowledge the feedback. So the first lead I will ask to speak is Councillor Phil Clearwater from Transport and Urban Development. Thank you, Phil.
So the other one should be on.
We've just got a hiccup here, everybody. We're getting it sorted.
Thank you. The feedback that we received, councillors, on the transport and urban development part of the consultation, I want to start actually by thanking the transport and urban development staff for their assiduous preparation really in this important part of our annual plan. It was also, though, very encouraging that from residents, there was generally they were very, very supportive of the current approach being taken in public transport, and in particular work to reduce our emissions and encourage public transport patronage. And this is entirely supported by our regional public transport plan, which states actually that Environment Canterbury will develop a suitable investment program to enable the transition to a fully zero emissions fleet as soon as possible and practicable. And I think an example of that, councillors, is our commitment, which in terms of the recent bus contracts, where there was going to be 25 new electric buses, as you know. Some of the feedback we received was less supportive due to concerns particularly about the use of rates to support public services. But I wasn't really clear whether those submitters were bus patrons or not, myself. However, the majority of those giving feedback on transport and urban development made comments or suggestions to improve and encourage public transport, as well as active transport, including integrated urban design and transport planning, reduction of the fare box recovery, or the provision of free public transport. Also increasing urban density and the development of commuter rail. On reducing the fare box recovery, Environment Canterbury is investigating proposals to improve bus services and infrastructure with the goal of increasing the number of bus patrons. At this point, councillors, free public transport would impact on all ratepayers, and currently Christchurch's bus fares are among the cheapest in New Zealand. And as you know, we're going to have a fare review in conjunction with the national ticketing system by the end of this year. Waimakere District Council and their community board raised concerns, as you know, that the rates increase was $57 and not $30 per year, as indicated in the earlier consultation at the end of 2019 on the Waimakere Express bus service. And it was unfortunate, I think, that the annual plan consultation in this respect may have been unclear. But again, special thanks to our transport staff and also to our Chair, Jenny Huey, for the constructive engagement with our partner councils and on finding a proposed resolution to this concern. So residents, having supported the on-demand transport system in Christchurch, And as an extent, and also there was from Timaru, there was an extension requested from the My Way project. There was also feedback about the frequency of our public transport and action to incentivise and encourage patronage. And that included services to Rolleston and the Selwyn district. And finally, there were requests for more multimodal approaches to our transport, including rail. And a mode shift plan is being developed by NZTA with input from their Greater Christchurch partnership. And that mode shift means to get us all out of our driver-only cars and commuting to work, whether that's through active transport or our public transport system. So some of the feedback about public transport is being addressed through the implementation of the Regional Public Transport Plan, the work of the Joint Public Transport and Regional Transport Committees. Also, some proposals from submitters can be addressed for the long-term plan when there will be further opportunity for our council to engage with the community on future aspirations for transport and urban development in Canterbury.
Thank you, Councillor Clearwater. Did anybody have a question of clarification? Okay, we'll continue with this process. I'm now going to turn to Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie and Councillor Vicky Southworth, who lead our Climate Change, Hazard, Risk and Resilience portfolio. Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Vicky. Yeah, you go first. Put your...
Yeah, so I'm just that's all I have to touch, isn't it? Just to be sure. It seems too simple. Yeah, I will begin, and then Liz will follow in after me. But we're co-leads, and so both have something to say. I would really like to thank staff for collating all of the submissions. It was great to see those submissions, and they were received from across the whole of Canterbury. I would also really like to thank everyone who took the time to read our annual plan and provide us with feedback. It's a time-consuming process and we all have busy lives, and it's really important that we around this table now consider what we've received from our constituents and the Cantabrians that took that time, and that we incorporate that information into our annual plan and our decision making. From my portfolio perspective, so the Climate Change, Hazards, Risk and Resilience portfolio, it was really good to hear the general support for Environment Canterbury's work on flood protection and emergency management. But for me, the strongest message that came through from submitters of direct relevance to this portfolio was concern about climate change. Many submitters asked to see Environment Canterbury leading on greenhouse gas mitigation. The most impactful statement for me was from our youth Roku, who expressed not just concern, but described fear of the climate change impacts that were coming and that would be present throughout their lives. And so those voices, hearing those younger voices, is a really important thing for me. Currently, Environment Canterbury is actually unable to consider greenhouse gas emissions in plans, but that may change with the proposed Resource Management Amendment Bill. However, we can support our communities in reducing their carbon footprint by providing public transport service, as previous portfolio transport and urban design lead just spoke of, ensuring that we have a service that's affordable, but also offers a viable alternative to the car. We can also continue to support educators by providing educational material on climate change and specialist education professionals to ensure that our children have a greater understanding of the science behind climate change and understand how they can respond in their own lives. And as an organisation, finally, but importantly, we can walk the talk. And as we shrink our carbon footprint within this organisation, we make sure that we share those learnings and we communicate that to other businesses so they can also have that support and follow our lead. Thank you.
So just to follow on from Vicky, just checking everyone can hear me okay?
I can hear you, Liz.
Excellent, okay. So there was very strong support and annual plan feedback for action on climate change. In terms of areas submitted wanted action on, climate change was identified as one of the major priorities. In terms of the Facebook feedback, we had climate change and resilience generated twice as many responses as freshwater and transport. Many submitters said that they supported a rates increase for climate change action. And annual plan submitters were quite specific about wanting communication around the risks and solutions for climate change. While most of the feedback tended to focus on mitigation, it also included pushing central government to act promptly on climate change, good communication of risks and solutions, faster adaptation measures, and faster integration of climate change into all local government decision making, and also extra funding for flood protection and emergency management. So in summary, the feedback from our annual plan engagement gives Council a strong mandate to prioritise and fast track action on climate change in our annual plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, councillors. Was there anybody that wanted to raise a point of clarification there? That's excellent. Thank you very much for that summary. We're now moving to Councillor Claire Mackay and Councillor Nicole Marshall to please speak to us from the Freshwater Portfolio Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll commence this one and then hand over to Nicole, who may like to add in and fill any gaps that I've missed. Look, I'd just particularly like to acknowledge that Freshwater and the Canterbury Water Management Strategy itself are a core function of Environment Canterbury. I'd like to acknowledge the role and the importance of us receiving feedback as part of our council deliberations, and those people that have taken the time to provide that feedback. Unfortunately, I don't see a response of 160 odd people providing some feedback as a real mandate, but I do acknowledge that they've taken that time and the consents have been received by us. I think it was also a particularly difficult time that we were in COVID, and we had to have virtual meetings using often new software to those people that were presenting to us. And similarly with us, we were getting used to it as well, and some of the presentations didn't go as smoothly as they might have. However, that was what we had, and we really do appreciate the people taking the time. With regard to the Freshwater Portfolio, that is page 30 of your agenda. The feedback there is actually summarised. There was certainly general support for the CWMS program, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, and also the direction of our Freshwater Portfolio work. And whilst in planning, we're now moving from a planning phase to an implementation phase of our plans, and certainly a much stronger focus on monitoring and data collection. This was actually also supported by submitters and their feedback. Concerns were very wide-ranging. There was they're the ones that we normally hear with freshwater, ranging from quality, quantity, right through to compliance and monitoring, especially of pollutants and infrastructure efficiency, such as fish screens. Several submitters took the time and presented to us about some specific issues that they saw and noted a need for more funding and resourcing to implement, for example, the NPS freshwater. And we're not quite sure what that may look like, what's coming, but we need to be actually cognizant of the fact that we may have to put a significant amount of more resourcing into that. There was also comments relating to us to perhaps put some more focus on urban issues or urban waterways, particularly comments around our braided rivers and our high country lakes. That was very important to some submitters. I think the other thing I'd just like to note in closing this out is that this freshwater portfolio has very close ties with our biodiversity, biosecurity, our hazards, risk and resilience, and our rural regional leadership portfolios as well. And Nicole, you might like to add something there?
Got it. Thank you, Councillor Mackay. I'd just like to agree with everything you've covered there, and also add in a thanks to our very capable and talented Secretary, Louise McDonald. She did a fantastic job at facilitating these feedback sessions with much technical difficulty that plagued us, and she did an absolutely fantastic job at helping us through this process. And I just want to be explicit in my thanks for you, Louise. Thank you very much. And very much agree that water is front and centre of everyone's minds at what we do here in Environment Canterbury and throughout our region, and it touches every aspect of what flows through us, and that was definitely reflected in the feedback we've received, and people, generally supporting the direction we're taking, but just wanting us to step up a wee bit more. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay and Councillor Marshall. Was there any clarification anybody wanted around that summary? All right, we'll move on. We're up now to Councillor Lan Fan, who is the lead of the Biodiversity and Biosecurity Portfolio. Thank you, Lan.
Thank you, Chair. Just checking, can everyone hear me at this stage? Excellent. Thank you, Chair. I'm really happy to present a brief overview of the feedback we received on the annual plan with regards to this portfolio. And firstly, I wish to, of course, acknowledge the exceptional work of staff across this area. We had some particularly switched on submitters in our hearings, in that almost every, bar a couple, raised this portfolio to be a priority for them, with many comments indicating biodiversity should be further elevated with more action and investment in order to protect our unique biodiversity here in Canterbury, Waitaha. Alongside a call for greater protection efforts was a call and wide support for regeneration and restoration, which for this council is kicking off with our regeneration working group, Me Uru Rākau. And on that note, I wanted to touch on one submitter, ecologist Colin Merck's comments, where he reminded us that, quote, "The key in conservation is connecting people to nature. If conservation is not around where we live, then it essentially doesn't exist," something he described as extinction of experience. Suggestions were made to increase funding to support biodiversity and biosecurity efforts, or at least maintain if budgets are constrained due to COVID-19. Areas for increased funding included biosecurity, particularly for biodiversity pests, wetlands, braided river management, and data. Support for landowners through more education and being really proactive in tools and incentives was also noted. Comments on biosecurity included support for pathway management, a focus on incursion response and wilding conifer control, which we've had some success in the recent government budget. With specific pest issues and comments were made around the need for management of pests such as Canada geese, Russell lupins, wallabies, cats, and spur valerian, and we have noted those comments. Stronger regulation and compliance were, like other portfolios, a theme, and included proposals such as regulation for wetlands and more funding for implementation of the new or expected MPS for Indigenous biodiversity. Land use change and intensification were also flagged as a concern. And that is my summary. We welcome the feedback, and I believe it's been really helpful and will continue to be helpful in our deliberations ahead. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lan. That was a very good summary, and I was interested to hear Colin Merck's comment repeated by you, which I recall from the hearings. Any other people wanting clarification, councillors I'm referring to, around Lan's report? Right, thank you, Councillor Fan. The next one we're moving on to is Councillor Peter Scott, and he's going to talk about the air portfolio. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, we've got some feedback. Have you got mine? Hold, it might be mine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll leave my camera off because where I am situated, the camera on doesn't allow anything else to go on. So I'm going to leave it off. So unfortunately, you won't see me, but you will hear me. Ki te mihi nui kai konehira and kai mahi. Thank you for giving us this opportunity. And I'd like to thank the submitters who submitted to the plan and specifically those people that commented on air. Through this process, we haven't had a lot of submissions directly on air, but they were strongly supportive of our current approach to improving air quality across Canterbury. And just to reiterate to people, our focus is on pollution from home heating, industrial emissions and transport sources. Submissions also raised concern about greenhouse gas emissions, and as I think Vicky referred to, at the moment that is being handled in hazards, risk and resilience. And once we get a clearer direction on where we're going with this, then we'll reassess that. Our air quality program for the term of the annual plan will maintain its existing focus. There'll be no financial implications on budgets other than the existing the CPI increases. Any changes that we make to our air portfolio going forward, we will address through the long-term plan process, and we're looking forward to that. There is some speculation that we need to refocus, but we'll do that through that process. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Any clarification questions around the air portfolio? Thank you. I don't think so. Now we will hear from Councillor Scott again around regional leadership. Thank you, Peter.
Did you say rational leadership, Chair, or did you say regional leadership?
If I said rational, my brain's obviously cooked and something really radical should happen to me, but I meant to say regional.
Look, thank you for that. And again, with regional leadership, there weren't a lot of submissions, and generally they were supportive of the direction that we're taking and our support for the territorial authorities and for mana whenua leadership across Canterbury. There was also support for our community engagement with the youth ropu, Enviro schools and other community groups. There was, however, comment also that relationships with some stakeholders and other councils could improve, specifically around climate change. And as you would have heard under the climate change hazard risk portfolio, that will be a focus for us going forward. Comms around our annual plan process was mentioned as well, and as an area that we could improve on. I think this specifically came through the youth ropu. Community support and funding was topical and has caused us to focus on this issue for the long-term plan, so that will become an issue that the regional leadership portfolio will take up. And there was some criticism in terms of our compliance monitoring of the environment, and there were areas that were suggested that we could strengthen in our effort to ensure that that we're doing what we should be doing. So financial implications are very little, except CPI. So that's regional leadership, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scott. Was there any questions for clarification around Councillor Scott's report from the regional leadership portfolio? Well, it doesn't look like it. So thank you very much, Peter, and I thank all the leads for their summaries. I think it's very worthwhile to do that. Thank you to staff for making that recommendation, because we need to record a summary of what was presented to us. So now we need to I call for a mover and a seconder of recommendation 1. If you just put online, if you'd like to move recommendation 1, that is receives the summary of the public engagement and staff advice and agrees the summary is an accurate reflection on the community feedback. Have we got a mover? Councillor Mackay is indicating she would move. Is there a seconder? Councillor Grant Edge is seconding. Oh, it's on there, is it, Nicole? Alarm, what's she say? Oh no, she's going to second the chair's motion, I think. This is not the chair's motion. This, unless I've got that wrong. This is Claire's, this is the Claire, moved by Claire and seconded by Grant. I'll put that resolution. All in those favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? There being no one against, I'll declare that carried. So we're now moving on to the second part of what we need to do, and that is that the council formally receive the supplementary information on the public transport. So I would like to move for some. I'd like to call for a mover and a seconder of that resolution. That is receiving the supplementary information on the public transport. Moved, Councillor Clearwater. Seconded, who seconded, Nicole? Councillor Marshall. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. No one against. I don't see. Thank you very much. I'll declare that carried. Now we're moving on to recommendation 2, which is on page 15, I think. And for recommendation 2, I'll just read out what that says, and that's the council is directing staff on the preferred total rates revenue increase for the annual plan. And we do that by agreeing on one of the formal options that's on the council paper. Now, to move this forward, I am going to move from the chair the staff's preferred option, which is option 4, which is recommended to us. Now, let me state really clearly before I move this resolution that we're going to follow the standing orders, which we have clearly discussed and will be informed by governance around that process. So I will move formally from the chair that option 4, council direct staff to bring forward option 4 as the total rates increase, which includes the 2.3 baseline and adds 0.9% general reserve allocation and amount for public transport service provisions as stated in the council report. Now, I'm going to call for a seconder to that, and I believe I've got an indication from Councillor Farm that she will second that resolution. Would you like to confirm that, please?
Confirm that. Thanks, Jenny. All
right. Now what happens is that the mover has 5 minutes to speak to this resolution. I won't take 5 minutes. I am moving the staff recommendation as the preferred option because I know that the public sector advice from our staff around this is very much founded in listening to us, listening to the community and giving us the very most sound advice they can get. The options remained in this. The advantages are that the option retains some of the reserves built up. What's happening? Peter, have you got your mic off? Because I think we just heard you. Everybody should have their mic off, please. So as I was saying, the advantages, which are clearly set out in the report, are that this option retains some of the reserve build up in the general reserve, and more importantly, it provides flexibility to consider some additional initiatives during the year, including the coastal plan review, regional planting and regeneration projects. It has flexibility which enable those activities to get a start because they're viewed as very important as we move into the long-term plan for 2021 to 2031. It incorporates the forecast end-of-year adjustments, inflation changes and saving as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. You will recall that we instructed staff to work with the budget to take into account the recovery that our whole society is going to have to do from leading out from the pandemic. So it's very important work that the staff have undertaken here. It incorporates forecast end of the year reinstates public transport service improvements, and a total rates revenue increase may be can be acceptable to the community because of COVID-19 considerations. in terms of people being able to pay their rates and afford to keep living during this recovery period, which is really difficult, and we really have no idea how that's going to play out. So we're trying to take a role as a public entity in doing our very best to move that forward. One of the disadvantages is that some of the community may have a perception that we won't be able to respond to one-off flood events or other maybe climate change induced incidents in our community, but we need to assure the public that we are in a very good financial position, and we are at the moment in a financial position that allows us to easily and readily, given the expertise of our staff, get money in very advantageous rates to work with our community and respond to a flood or any other disaster like we normally would. So I recommend this option to the council for consideration, and I invite the seconder to speak, or maybe the seconder would like to reserve their right to speak till later in the debate. What are you doing, Councillor Farn? Are you speaking now, or are you waiting till later?
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Chair. I wish to speak now. I'd just like clarification. I want to second the motion with a set of amendments. And could you please confirm for me how long I would have to speak to that?
Advice. I'll just seek advice.
So Councillor Farm has.
Oh, you can speak.
Just go
there's
straight
yours,
into the
Cindy.
microphone for everyone,
Yeah.
Cindy. Thank you.
Councillor Farm has seconded the motion that's on the table. And so there's no opportunity to have an amendment from that as the seconder of the motion. It's on the table.
Okay, in that case, should I withdraw my seconding because I wish to speak to second it with amendments? So if it's no longer on the table, I just want clarity there, please.
Councillor, I'll just come back to you in a moment, Councillor Farn. Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a process question? Would it be in order, though, for Councillor Farm to second it and flag that she would like to make some amendments later?
Thank you. I've just checked with governance prior to you saying that with the leave of the chair, I could allow her to flag amendments that she might be going to make to the process. I'll just get that confirmed by governance, please, if you turn your mic on. Just hold on a minute, we're making sure we're following the exact rules here.
I'll read Standing Order 3.96, which says once an amendment is moved, when a motion has been moved and seconded, then proposed by the chairperson for discussion, an amendment may be moved or seconded by any member who has not spoken to the motion, whether an original motion or a substitutive motion. The mover or seconder of a motion for the adoption of the report of a committee who desires to amend any item in the report may also propose or second an amendment. So it is possible. Well, yes, this is a report.
All right, so have we got that clear? Oh. So is everybody clear about that? Lan, are you clear?
Yes, so if I'm hearing that correctly, I'm able to second your motion and also proceed with some amendments?
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Once it's moved, which it has been.
So you can do that right now if you want to.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm very happy to kick things off by seconding the motion with amendments. I want to start by reflecting briefly on where we've come from. Yes, we started at 9.8%, and every dollar of that we agreed as a council was agreed justifiable expenditure that best enabled us to deliver to our communities the outcomes they expect of us. Then, as Jenny's outlined, COVID-19 blindsided us all alongside with the rest of the world. And staff have been somewhat put through the ringer in so competently adapting to the situation with ever-changing information or lack of information. A huge thank you to staff for your work and bearing with us to this point. As a council, since recomposing ourselves in this new normal, I've been heartened by the shared sentiment and commitment around this table, where we agreed the 9.8% was no longer justifiable in the current economic climate where many of our communities may be facing financial hardship. And I want to emphasise and support the fact that every city and district council across Canterbury have rates relief or deferral options for those who need it. And I do want to stress that there is a need for compassion and kindness in this space, and there are available avenues for that. Key to our role as councillors of Environment Canterbury is not simply to make the best decisions for today, but for the future. And in this climate and ecological emergency, I believe we have a heightened obligation to keep the preparing for the future and younger and future generations in mind. In saying that, I support and move second the staff recommended option 4 on page 21 with amendments. And I've provided these amendments to councillors and staff in electronic form, and I think some have been physically tabled, in order to provide greater transparency to our ratepayers about what we're rating for and why it's so important that we do so at this time. And I want to briefly outline what those things are and why they're so important. As set out in the paper.
Just hold on a minute, Lan, just hang on a minute.
I think we need what the amendment is to be in front of everybody, so we
Yeah, so some of us don't seem to have that amendment in front of us. Have we got it? Where is it? You've seen it on email, have you?
Yes, I have. I'm just about to verbally set out what that is, as well as having provided it to everyone.
It needs to be in writing.
I think it just needs to be in writing. Hang on a minute. Louise,
It is in writing.
It is in writing, but just hang on a minute. We haven't got it up here in front of us. We'll just get it. Okay, so we can see it. We just haven't done that yet. I haven't been looking at my emails for. Louise, can you help it? Have you got that amendment? The foreshadowed amendment.
Yes.
You got that?
I will quickly add it to the chat.
Okay, so you've got it, have you?
I will
put it on there. And then,
I'll put it on the chat.
Okay.
Just give me a sec.
Yeah, all right, that'd be excellent. And you can do that as we go along too. That'd be great. Thanks very much. I'm sorry we've been with Cindy in the room. I'm just taking direct advice from Cindy as well here.
That's a very good idea.
Okay, we'll just wait a minute till we get this ordered and
Can you see it in the chat now, councillors?
oh yes, the option includes the 2.3 baseline and adds that one, but that's the normal one, isn't it? We're talking about the one that Lan circulated. Perhaps she didn't include you in the email, Louise.
No, this is the correct one. Perhaps I could continue in explaining.
So there.
Yeah, okay, we have got it. We have got it, so it's here. We've also got a point of order. Will we take this at the end of her talking? I think you don't interrupt, do you, or not? You don't. No, we'll take the point of order when Lan has finished. Thank you, Lan. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. So as set out in the original option, is put in front of you now, I wish to support the inclusion of the 2.3% baseline and confirm that 893k for public transport improvements, which are critical to us rebuilding this core service post-COVID and reducing our transport emissions. What I wish to see amended in the option for our final consideration on this annual plan in June is the proposal from staff that we would rate for general reserves to give us flexibility in responding to what we've heard from our communities through our annual plan consultation, through allocating funds to our general rate pool rather than tagging the projects up front. My view is that if we think it is important enough to rate our communities for the project expenditure, especially at this time, then it is equally important to outline what that expenditure is for and be absolutely transparent about that. Therefore, I'd like to direct councillors' consideration in confirming these funds as being allocated to the following. Firstly, 500k to the Coastal Environment Plan. This goes to the core of our statutory role, and further delay in this space is now unacceptable. More funds, as proposed as an option, allows a more comprehensive review, including critically managing coastal development in light of climate impacts, comprehensive consultation with our Ngāi Tahu partners in order to best reflect their rights and values as mana whenua, and developing protection for marine biodiversity. Secondly, linked to the coastal plan is the need to commence a climate engagement program, budgeted for 150k. As noted by our chair at our last public meeting, we are now 1 year on from our declaration of a climate emergency, and we need to continue to progress our actions to fit our words. Staff noted in our annual plan feedback a desire for a significant community engagement opportunity on climate change. So I see this project as aiming to build on our community's understanding and awareness of the climate challenge we face. We cannot, in my view, delay these important conversations. And thirdly, 250k to support the recommendations of our Planting and Regeneration Working Group, Me Uru Rākau. When we asked our Canterbury communities the question of their appetite for ECAN leading a region-wide regeneration planting program, the vast majority of over 100 respondents said yes. Some commented specifically on the opportunities to create jobs and involve the community. This kind of large-scale project doesn't happen overnight. To adequately prepare for this, we need to set funds toward it as part of this annual plan to enable the recommendations of this group to have impact and leverage the central government funding and job opportunities which stem from such investment, aiding in post-COVID economic recovery. Finally, I want to acknowledge too that this option leaves us without any reserve build-ups proposed in the river schemes. As staff outlined, this increases the risk that there will be insufficient reserves to respond to one-off events. This is a risk I don't take lightly when we know climate impacts are resulting in more frequent natural disasters. Personally, I do believe there is a justification for building our reserves. However, this is a time of compromise, and due to the economic uncertainties and impacts presented by COVID, we need to have the economic impacts front and centre in this annual plan. However, I'm somewhat comforted from the assurance from both staff and our PAR committee that this risk can be mitigated by the availability of low-cost borrowing which we can access should the need arise. In summary, I believe option 4 with proposed amendments, as stated, provides us a solid basis in which we have greatly reduced our proposed rate increase and prioritised 3 key areas of expenditure which are critical to us listening to our communities, responding to our long-term challenges, and getting on with building a resilient Canterbury Waitaha. Yes, the option has its shortfalls, but this is a time of compromise and prudence, and I think we've struck that here. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Farn. So you are foreshadowing that as a future amendment. At this stage, we need to call for a seconder to that amendment to get it on the table, and then we park it. So I call for a seconder. Oh, is there a seconder to the amendment, the foreshadowed amendment put forward by Councillor Farn? All right.
Councillor Mackenzie in the chat has seconded as well. So
I'll have that seconded by Councillor Craig Pauling. I saw your second there too, Councillor Mackenzie, but I heard Councillor Pauling first, unfortunately. Oh, my thing's not on. Thank you very much. I'm having it seconded by Councillor Craig Pauling. Thank you, Craig. But could I please ask the councillors in the chamber to indicate they want to second it online too? Otherwise, it's not really fair at the moment too. So that was a bit of a technical slip up there. So apologies, Councillor Liz Mackenzie. Seconded by Councillor Pauling. And what we do now is continue with the discussion of the original resolution. That we'll have to take the point of order first. And Ian, you can make the point of order now.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In Councillor Farm's, in seconding the original motion, she referred to the fact that the council had supported the 9.8% rate increase. That is not true. She suggested that we not only supported the 9.8% rate increase, but also the priorities, the projects and the funding for it. That's not true. The only thing the council has done is approved that the 9.8 annual plan rate increase would go out for public consultation. So I think that should be recorded as a fact, please.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. I'll just check the rules, but I'm thinking it's not an point of order. Thank you very much. Just I've taken advice and it's a comment. It's not a point of order. So thank you very much.
Well, it seems to me that it is a point of order because it's a question. Point of order.
Okay. Just a minute while we read out. Okay. So do you want to read that out, Cindy?
The point of order that the member could be referring to perhaps is a misrepresentation of any statement made by a member or by an officer.
Absolutely. And it is clearly a misrepresentation of the position of this council.
Point 8.
Yeah. Okay. Well, advice from the CE is, I've noted it, as I said, and we went out for engagement on 9.8, and that's what I understand Councillor Farn was referring to. We'll now move on from that point of order, and I believe we've got a second point of order. Is that a second point of order? Yes, I know.
Have we got it yet? No. Okay. What the staff are advising us is that a point of order really has to be about a matter of process. I am quite clear in my understanding of the standing order and the way the staff have related that because a councillor or elected member makes a mistake or says something that someone disagrees with, it's not actually a point of order. It has to relate to a whole process, matter of process. Perhaps the staff can tell me that's all, if I'm correct.
I'm telling you, you're correct. Thank you very much. We're moving on now. So we are having debate on the original motion.
On the amendment.
Oh, are we doing the amendment now? I thought you were doing.
Cindy, we do have Councillor Sunkel asking.
Hold on a minute. Yeah. I thought she was. We'll take it now. Yes. Yeah. Yes, Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you. My clarity is that the motion has been seconded with an amendment, and that has been seconded. We do need to deal with the amendment before we have the conversation. Is that correct?
That's what we're doing. Thanks for checking. That's really helpful. So now what we do, so everybody is clear, we deal with the amendment, which has been moved by Councillor Lan Farn and seconded by Councillor Craig Pauling. So you can, the mover can speak to the amendment, which he's already done. So the seconder can either speak to it now or reserve their right of reply.
I'd like to reserve my right of reply, please. I'd like to reserve my right of reply, please.
Noted. Okay, so amendment, yeah, to be discussed. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so what's happening now is that we'll discuss the amendment. So that's what this debate's about. So I'll call for speakers for the amendment. Who is indicating they want to speak? Somebody needs to help me here because
So we're going with Councillor Scott first.
Councillor Peter Scott first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair,
excuse me, Peter, we have to stop a minute. We've got a process. I understand they have to be for it, but let me just check with governance.
All those who wish to speak that are for the amendment.
Yeah, they go first. I think that's correct. Thank you very much. Pete, Phil, have you got another point of order? Oh, speak. Yeah, have you got yourself on this list? Yes, make sure you're in that list, whether you're in the room or not. Okay, let's get back to this. We're back to you, Peter. I'm sorry about that interruption. Over to you, please.
I'm going to speak against, so I'll go down the list.
Thank you. Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Councillor Farm indicated, councillors, when we went out with our draft annual plan, the consultation really was in the last based on the last long-term plan, 5.5% to 9.8%, reaching 9.8%. However, as Councillor Farm has explained, clearly at a time when our country has probably never been in such a concerning financial position, impacting on so many ratepayers, a high rate increase is not acceptable, or even a rate increase of 5.5%. But in my view, a rate increase of 4% is fair and reasonable balance. And I'm incorporating aspects of the amendment which Councillor Farm has raised here. We need to balance our requirements to constrain spending at this stage against the need for investment in addressing the long-term environmental challenges that Canterbury faces, including the overarching serious challenges of climate change. We need to continue the core business of Council, at the same time ensuring we also invest in the recovery from COVID-19 and playing our part in preparing to find long-term solutions. Fortunately for the future of Aotearoa's economic recovery, we have opportunities to work with central government, but we need to have some skin in the game. Fortunately, our council is in a strong financial position. We have low debt and we have an ability to borrow funds for investment. We can achieve this necessary balance. I'm sure we're aware that the councils we work with in partnership, as Councillor Farm described, will be clear that rate payments can be postponed for ratepayers who have lost their jobs or who are struggling financially. However, to reduce the rate to a CPI level of 2.3% would mean virtually no improvement at all for our public transport system, which is already well behind the transport systems of Auckland and Wellington. Neither would there be any significant improvement or meaningful engagement on our coastal plan, or improvement in our climate change engagement, or our tree planting and regeneration. A 4% limit as rates increase will still allow much needed investment in our transport system. A reduced, let alone no improvement in our public transport services would only mean that Greater Christchurch and the freight delivery system across Canterbury will be going in a reverse direction only. So a 4% increase is a fair balance. And I'm also pleased that in this budget, there will be no bus fare increase at all for our bus patrons in the budget. I'm very pleased to support the amendments regarding the funding of our coastal planning so that Environment Canterbury, we can play our essential environmental role in future coastal planning. It needs to include restoration of so many of our coastal wetlands, which play a major filtering role in absorbing any polluted water, especially with the sedimentation of so many of our streams and rivers. The challenging reality of climate change cannot stay in the too hard basket. As a council, following the climate change emergency having been declared a year ago, We need to take practical steps to address the problems of gradual but real sea level rise, increased frequency and severity of storm events and consequent flooding, which is already impacting seriously on Canterbury, and the Rangitata River floods are a recent example. Addressing climate change issues is a key responsibility for Environment Canterbury, including the attention required to the human and psychosocial impact for our residents. Climate change comes on top of Canterbury residents' experiences of our country's worst earthquakes, the fires which devastated our Port Hills, the shocking mosque shootings a year ago, and now the need to recover from COVID-19. Our council must take a lead in the complete, careful community engagement about the impact of future climate change and sea level rise. Environment Canterbury must be the lead agency, developing an educational program about these hazards and the impact which will affect large areas of Christchurch and our Canterbury coast. In Christchurch, besides the coastal areas, the river corridors, thank you, of the Avon and Heathcote rivers are already being impacted with more frequent flooding. Our council must take a lead, take the reins, and not be afraid of having these conversations. As a council, we need to utilise our strengths, our knowledge and understanding of environmental issues facing us. I thank all of our residents actually in making a submission on these lines. And while I'm speaking, I also want to again thank the many staff, and I thank councillors for considering this option at a 4% increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clearwater. If I'm correct here, the next speaker is Councillor Grant Edge. That's right. Please proceed. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, it is off. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully there's no feedback now. I wish to, I'm supportive of option 4, and I'm supportive of Councillor Farm's proposed amendments to option 4 and her reasoned and compassionate comments that she's made. Rather than having a general reserve allocation of 0.9%, I think that the proposed amendment provides certainty to that expenditure. In terms of the coastal plan, it's an important regulatory requirement. It was postponed in the 2019-20 annual plan, and we need to begin to review this process, which will take 2 years. The community have supported this, especially in its ability or consideration of issues related to the protection and management of marine animals, apart from all those other coastal issues that are going to take place in the next few years. In terms of climate change engagement, a considerable amount of scientific work is currently underway to assess the impacts of climate change, specifically allocating a sum of money now to engage with the public on a major future issue without surprises is going to be really important. We've had COVID-19, which has taken the planet by surprise. Climate change is going to be upon us by stealth. In terms of planting and revegetation, this will provide a certainty about an important contribution that Canterbury can make in restoring the environment and supporting the government's green recovery issues. All of those 3 things are specific items relevant to the entire region, and they have gained support within the annual plan process by many in the Canterbury community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edge. The next person on the speaking list is Councillor Vicky Southworth. Thank you, Vicky. Oh, there's a point of order. Who's made a point of order?
Megan has requested one.
Where is that? I can't see that. That's there.
Yes, there.
Should we take that now?
Yes.
Yes, Councillor Hands, what is your point of order, please?
Thank you. I just wanted to have a point of order just to clarify that if members speak to an amendment or a motion that has been put, are they then able to speak again later, or are they out of the debate once they have spoken to an amendment or a motion?
I have my view, but I'll just check with.
It's just slightly unclear from my reading of the standing orders. Thank you.
Question, thank you.
So from standing orders is after the amendment is put in, if it is lost, any members who have not spoken to the motion, whether an original motion or a substituted motion, movers of previous amendments which were lost are regarded as having spoken to the motion only, and you are entitled to speak to the new amendment, but are not entitled to move or second a new amendment. So you're entitled to speak, but not to move and second if you've spoken to an amendment.
Councillor Sunkel, could you put your speaker on, please, so everybody knows?
That's right.
Everybody might be...
Sorry, wrong one. I'm just the clarity in my mind. If I spoke against this amendment, I have the right to then move an amendment in the future, or that's the clarity I'm looking for. I'm trying to get my head right.
Yes, that is correct, Councillor Sunkel.
And then move an amendment in the subsequent time.
Thanks for clearing that up. Everyone's on the same page. Now I'm back to Councillor Vicky Southworth. Is that correct? She's the next one.
So, mic on. Okay. Yep. I would strongly support option 4 with the amendments that Councillor Farm has proposed. It's a really tricky decision to be making here. We know that communities are going to be struggling with financial realities that COVID's delivering to us. But at the same time, for me, it was really clear through the annual plan submissions that people, despite the COVID current situation, are very, very concerned about our future and with regards to climate change and to ecological degradation that we've seen and continue to see. And so for me, striking a balance between an inflationary rate rise and somewhere towards ensuring that we can do our best for climate change and for ecological security is important. And for me, this amendment ensures that that's the case. It's really important that we support public transport. That was a strong message that came through. And of course, that's a real clear way that we can help to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Option 4 locks in funding for the improved bus services, which seems like a strange thing to do at this time of COVID-19, where we're seeing reduced capacity on our buses and reduced patronage. But of course, there are pressures on the system, and we've seen that with the school buses in particular. Even in times of COVID, we still need our bus systems to run. The great thing is that with these improvements, we'll have an improved system when we get back out of COVID-19. And so I support sticking to those improvements that we identified. We also are avoiding raising child fares through the option 4 and reducing the Metro card, which enables more people to access low carbon transport. In terms of the general reserve, the amendments that the Councillor Farm has proposed, I feel we need to ring fence the funds for things that match up with what we've heard through the annual plan submissions. We have an opportunity to respond to the annual plan. We need to take clear leadership in communicating climate change issues. That was a message that came through that our communities would like to see us do. We need to increase our engagement with communities and help them understand the long-term risks that are associated with climate change and work together with them to find the best solutions for living with our changing environment, and we need to form plans. We need to enable our communities most at risk from sea level rise, floods or erosion to feel safe and be able to enjoy their lives whilst preparing for change that's coming and avoiding the transfer of significant costs to future generations. We need to help communities get drought ready while ensuring that our natural water environments are not left short. Building a shared understanding of the science, the risks and the solutions is critical, and that will take extensive two-way conversations with our communities. For this reason, I feel that putting $150,000 or 0.15% of the rate rise towards coastal climate change communications is really important. It will complement the development of our regional policy statement and the coastal environment plan, which I'll speak to in a moment. The regional policy statement review is to get underway, and that neatly complements the coastal environment plan, which we can bring forward and we can work on to a greater extent if we commit a 0.5% rate, 0.5% of the rate rise to that work. Staff have given us a clear indication that they can expand on the detail and look at managing coastal hazards in light of sea level rise, and also work towards protecting marine biodiversity and incorporating Ngāi Tahu values and interests. The plan is currently well out of date, and this will bring the management of land and our coastal zones up to date with the latest science. It also offers...
if you could just be finishing off now for your 5 minutes.
Oh, did that go off? Sorry, that was... yeah, so I would like to see ring fence those projects as Councillor Farmer has proposed, and that to me is important with respect to the annual plan submissions that we've heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Southworth. Now, the next person indicating they want to speak, I think I'm correct, is Councillor John Sunkel. Is that right? I think it.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie. Over to you, Liz.
Okay. So I support this motion with, the amendment with the motion with the amendment, because it allows for earmarking of funds for climate change from the general reserve. Now, the reason that I support ring fencing of funds for climate change as a separate project is because there's strong support in our annual plan feedback for action on climate change. Many submitters said they supported a rates increase for climate change action. Climate change cannot simply be tacked on to the coastal plan review because there are many elements to climate change, such as housing, transport, infrastructure, water and food supply resilience that fall outside the coastal plan. And our annual plan submitters were very specific that they wanted communication around risks and solutions around climate change. So it's imperative that we begin our community engagement now. We are observing the effects of climate change now, and our territorial authorities are scrambling to deal with those effects. Our community needs to be fully aware of what the future holds and have realistic expectations of the type of support they will have access to. They need to start thinking now about what choices they can make right away to start their pathway to adaptation. Currently, we do not have enough staff time and funding to have the community forums, workshops, education and engagement around climate change. However, right now, we have an opportunity because there are many recently unemployed journalists and writers with the skills required for good communication and engagement. We could potentially aid COVID-19 recovery by using people like this to help us connect with our communities on climate change. So while ring fencing funding does reduce the amount of funding available for the emergency reserves, and while I would prefer a slightly higher rates rise in order to compensate for this, we do have to be cognizant of the fact that our society faces an immediate economic hardship because of the current pandemic. But we are also facing a climate emergency, an ecological emergency, and we do need adequate funds to respond to the effect of future floods and extreme climate events on our regional infrastructure. So I would not support going lower than 4% on our rates, as this would set a precedent that leaves our regional council vulnerable for the future when we are facing increased droughts, pandemics, storms and flooding. Secondly, the majority of us did not get voted in with the mandate of business as usual. We are in a position where we have to make up for the previous underinvestment in climate change and in the environment, which has left us in an environmental debt. In summary, we've been given a mandate to support immediate action on climate change. And I feel that we need to reflect this in our expenditure of our rates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McKenzie. Who have we got next? Councillor Four. Who else is indicated here? Councillor Mackay. She hasn't indicated whether she's for or against. Or are you speaking for or against? Against. Councillor Marshall. Have you? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Councillor.
So we go back up to Councillor Scott.
Councillor Scott. He's against. Chair.
Yeah, so we're going back to that order.
Has Councillor? What did Councillor Marshall say?
That she hasn't indicated yet.
Oh, she hasn't indicated yet. Okay, we're up to Councillor Scott. Over to you to speak now, Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I just, I would vote against this, and I would speak against this because I don't believe that we should be ring fencing money in the general reserves, and I will speak to the substantive motion after this amendment.
Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker on our list then is Councillor Sunkel. Yes, Councillor Sunkel is next on the list. Thank you, John.
Thank you again, and I will.
Your microphone.
Thank you again, and I will keep my comments purely to the amendment, and I speak against the amendment. I do not believe that we should be ring fencing those finances into reserves for those outcomes, and I will speak again more substantively to that once the motion has been put and indicate I will be putting an amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Mackay.
Councillor Mackay, Claire, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will speak to the amendment as well and make further comments when we can go back to speak to the motion. I am against tagging the amendments as identified in the proposed amendments. I believe that these weren't part of the annual plan discussion document that went out. It was out for engagement, not consultation. And to me, it is adding these projects on to our ratepayers. My understanding is the annual plan document is still, we are still able to fulfil all of the work that we went out to our public and our ratepayers on within the CPI adjustment plus transport services.
Thank you, Councillor Mackay. Councillor Ian McKenzie.
Yes.
Councillor McKenzie, Ian, thank you. I didn't have my mic on, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too would like to speak against the amendments to the motion. To me, where the regional council should be investing in the long-term future, and which by inference doesn't give emergency requirements for short-term funding. And when I look at climate change engagement as a something of urgency, I dismiss it. And so tagging option 4 with specific spends, which, as Councillor Mackay has said, was not part of our annual plan discussion, they aren't, to me, something that in the current financial crisis we should be necessarily giving such a high priority to. And so I would vote against this, speak against this amendment, and reserve my right for full discussion once it becomes a substantive motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. And what are we up to now?
Councillor Hands.
Councillor Hands, I'll invite you to speak now, please.
Thank you. I would like to do similar to Councillor Scott. For me, I'd like to speak against the amendment. To me, the tagging of funds for specific projects, yet disguising them as being for reserves, completely contradicts the concept of reserves. We are either asking that we add these projects in to the annual plan, or we are putting money into specifying money for reserves, to tag them to specific projects to me isn't an allocation to a reserve, it is an allocation to those specific projects, and for that reason I would reject the amendment and reserve any further discussion on the substantive motion for later.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hands. Where are we up to now?
We don't have anyone else who's requested to speak.
All right. So what's the next? What does Councillor Marshall wish to speak? Oh, Councillor Marshall, do you wish to speak? I understood that Councillor Pauling was reserving his right of reply till the end. Is that correct? Councillor Marshall, you can speak now if you wish.
Sorry, I'll just clarify it for myself. If I speak to this motion, I can't speak to for or against other motions. Is that, or I can do my substantive reply now, and then I can do for or against still.
We'll just have the council secretary, the manager, please just clarify that so we're all clear again. It's very clear in the standing orders. What is it? 3.9 that you can. So go ahead.
Kia ora. Thank you very much. So yeah, I would like to start off by acknowledging and thanking staff for the efforts that went into first the 9.8 consultation draft annual plan, and then completely redoing everything to get us down to a base of 2.3 plus things that we would like to see. I would like to thank everyone who submitted on the annual plan and those who had the patience with us as we went through the online hearings. And I'd also like to thank everyone at this table and in this room today for having the patience and respect that we all deserve, and treating each other with dignity. Of the options presented, I'm really thankful to see the public transport increases be core amongst these. Having the service deliveries that we need to increase our public transport use to hit our service delivery targets, and also ensure for both Waimakariri residents and those who live downstream of the Cranford Street development that those timings and costings will be what they understand them to be. Now, if I understand Councillor Farm's movement correctly, the 0.9% that was tagged for general reserve, she instead wants it tagged for specific projects as opposed to tagged for reserves. And I would like to speak to specifically the coastal plan aspect of that. Previous councils had delayed this spending. It could be said that this could instead be funded for borrowing, but I feel that we owe it to our people to pay for it today. The coastal plan is overdue and it does need to be dealt with. With specific comment to reserve funding, I understand that it's currently raining, but it is not pouring. I think we should get some drops in our bucket while it is still socially acceptable to do so without putting undue harm on our community. We are in exceptional times, but times are only going to get more exceptional, and I think we need to be bearing that in mind in terms of how we're budgeting and how we're borrowing. In terms of rates relief, I want to stress the importance of working successfully with our territorial authority partners, and ensure that our territorial authorities are giving the options that will not delay harm, but are compassionate for our ratepayers and our communities. I also want to make a general closing comment around our funding models, is that there's increasing expectation of delivery of services and regulation from ECAN as the regulator and as an industry leader in local government, from our communities and from central government. And these expectations are not being equally met by funding mechanisms. We mainly fund through rates and user pays, and we cannot be expected to continue to provide increasingly complex services via these mechanisms. Our council has already challenged our staff to identify opportunities to invest to alleviate ratepayer burden, and I very much am thankful for staff to rising to this opportunity, and I'm very excited about the discussions to come from this. But I equally challenge our central government and communities to assist us in identifying opportunities to meet our expectations without creating undue financial burden. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Marshall. Are you speaking for or against? Just
Speaking for Lan's amendment based on how I understood it, with it not going instead. Yeah.
We're up to the right of reply if there's no other speakers, which I don't seem to see there are because everyone's spoken. Over to you, Councillor Pauling, your right of reply.
Hi, tēnā tātou anō. Like others, I want to acknowledge again the contributions of our community, of our staff, and of course councillors in considering and working through the annual plan. I acknowledge the arguments of my fellow councillors for thinking about other ways to do this. I acknowledge the difficulties that are being faced by our community at this time. However, I support the staff preferred recommendation of a 4% rate increase with the amendment moved by Councillor Farm and supported by other councillors, as you've heard. I applaud the efforts of our staff to get our budget to an inflation level of 2.3. Further to this, I support the reinstatement of our PT improvements recommended by staff, and I think that's appropriate, particularly due to COVID-19 impacts, as well as by the support received from submitters. Moreover, I support the inclusion of specific budgets to fund key projects and not as reserves that are supported by submitters and that invest in both COVID-19 recovery as well as our future. In particular, I support the coastal plan work. This is long overdue, and delaying it further is unacceptable. It can provide a critical tool to support marine ecosystem and biodiversity improvement, as well as climate change adaptation. This funding can help us get on with engaging with our partners and our community immediately. I support climate change engagement as it provides an appropriate response to a number of submitters and the climate emergency declared by the last council and supported by the majority of this council. Tree planting, I support the tree planting and regeneration project to accelerate our efforts to bring about a step change in biodiversity enhancement, something a number of submitters provided passionate support to. This funding will in particular support the working group Council has recently set up and to allow us to make immediate progress and potentially secure plant orders which are going to be in high demand. That's the end of my seconding, and I look forward to the motion being put. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pauling. We are now in a position where we don't have to put the amendment, and if this is carried, it becomes the substantive motion. So I'm going to put the amendment, which is the amendment moved by Councillor Farm, which is option 4 with amendments. The general reserve allocation is specifically allocated as 500,000 for coastal environment plan, 15,000 for climate change. 150,000, sorry, for the climate change engagement program, and 250,000 for Mea Ura Raku recommendation. And what else is in there?
To confirm.
I'll confirm PT, that's public transport service improvements, amounts 893,000 for one Makariri for 1 month. So, all right, is that correct how I've read it out? So that's now, this is a vote. This will become the substantive motion if it's carried. So all those in.
If I may, sorry, Madam Chair, Councillor Farm has a point of order, please.
Point of order, please. Sorry, I'm a bit lost here. Yes, you please say your point of order.
Hi, sorry.
Can I speak in response?
Thanks, Chair. It's not a point of order. I'm just.
You can speak in response.
Excellent.
Got 5 minutes.
You've got 5 minutes to write a reply if you want it.
As a mover.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. First of all, I really just want to apologise to Councillor Mackenzie for my comment about the agreed position of Council on the 9.8. My intention, as the Chair correctly interpreted, was simply that we had an agreed position to consult on, and I acknowledge that my comment was unclear on this, and I appreciate being pulled up on it so that I can clarify. So thank you for that. To Councillor Mackay, in terms of the comments around the projects being additional projects not consulted on, I just want to draw your attention specifically to item point 12, which is on page 17 of our paper, where it talks about specific funding for progress of a comprehensive coastal plan review and more budget provision to support efforts in regional planting and regeneration projects was noted in the feedback. And I want to note as well that staff noted, quote, a desire for significant community engagement opportunity on climate change. Now, I just want to highlight these points because I think it's really important to keep in mind that we were going out to the community to hear their thoughts. This is what came back, and this is absolutely in line with what is in our annual plan and what we have been out to the community with. This is where this has come from, so I want to stress that. In response to Councillor Hands, I think there's some confusion about my amendment, and I really want to clarify that. If you refer to the amendment, sorry, and I'll just get that up here. It talks about confirming the general reserve allocation. Now that could equally say, and personally I would be open to this amendment being put by someone, it could equally suggest that we remove the general reserve allocation, because I agree, and that was part of my initial comments, that I don't think we should be building up general reserves. I agree with that. We could remove the general reserve allocation and instead confirm specific project funds to be allocated for the following. So it's just sort of the way you want to word it, but I totally agree with that sentiment. So that would be my right of reply, and thank you for that consideration.
All right, thank you very much. I'll waive my right, I believe I have, as the, no, that's not now, is it? No, I'm wrong. I'll put the motion, and all those in favour, please say aye, or indicate in the chat as well if you want to. Aye to the amendment. Thank you. All those against, please say no, and in the chat. And in the chat, please.
We'll just need to count these up a few.
Just a minute, we'll just need to get the council secretary to just add these up a minute so we're very clear of what's happening.
You were putting the amendment rather than the motion, weren't you?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. That is correct.
Through you, Chair, can I?
Are you indicating you want to speak? Can you just wait a minute, please, Councillor Hand, while the secretary does her work? So the outcome is 7 councillors have voted in support of for the amendment as put by Councillor Farn, and 5 are against. Thank you for recording that, Council Secretary. Does anybody want a show of hands or anything else, or want that to be recorded any differently? Okay, so we're moving on now.
The amendment's been put.
Yeah, the amendment's been put, and that now becomes and carried, and that now becomes the substantive motion, which was moved by me and seconded by who seconded? Lan, of course it was.
Yes, sorry.
So sorry about that, everybody. Yep. Seconded by Lan. So now we can have debate on the substantive motion. So are people indicating who wants to speak?
I believe Councillor Sunkel did at the very start of the meeting.
That's right, you did, John. Councillor Sunkel, please speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We now have the motion at the table, and I would like to move an amendment to that. And I have in the chat noted that the amendment would be to remove the 0.9% rate component, bringing the rate rise back to 3.1%. That it would be the amendment. I will leave it at that, seek a seconder, and then speak.
The wrong thing. I would like to get clear, just a minute, we need to get clear what Councillor Sunkel has moved. The room, if you usually record that, I just ask Councillor Marshall to please indicate when she's leaving, if she does leave, in the chat, so we can record the time she's leaving as well. So what we're going to do now is we have a situation where Councillor Clearwater raised a point of order around the resolution, the amendment put up by Councillor Sunkel. We have advised what Councillor Clearwater was referring to, we believe, is in the standing orders is called a direct negative. We now have advice from the Regional Council's senior legal person, Catherine Shecky, and I've got Catherine online. If you'd just like to speak to that, that'd be good. Thank you, Catherine.
Kia ora tātou, and thank you, Chair. As you know, the decision in terms of Standing Order 3.3.2 is yours to make. My advice to you as to whether Councillor Sunkel's proposed amendment is a direct negative is that it is not. Standing Order 3.9.12 says that something is a direct negative if it has the same effect as negating the motion. Here, I understand that what is proposed is to change a resolution to increase rates by 4% to rather be a resolution to increase rates to 3.1. That is, that it's the 2.3% baseline, the 0.9% increase for service improvements and Waimakariri Express services and public transport, but removing the 0.9% proposed to be allocated to general reserves. In my view, that is not a direct negative. It does not have the same effect as negating the motion.
Right, so just be clear here, John, Councillor Sunkel's words do not need to change then.
I do not believe they do.
What did she say there?
She did not believe that they do need to.
Thank you very much for your advice, Catherine. I accept that advice. So we have it clear. We'll move on with this discussion. We're up to you, Councillor Sunkel. You moved your motion, and it was seconded by Councillor Mackay. You may speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me, this is an important part of the process of debating the options that we have in front of us. And in making this amendment, I fully accept that the approximately $130,000 of targeted rates to transport within Christchurch is an appropriate expenditure and works out at something around $1.50 per ratepayer. And given the social and transport needs post-COVID, is perfectly a viable option and should be in place. Where I guess I depart a little from some of my colleagues is how we fund some of those other options if we choose to fund them that have been put forward. My first view is that the transport option is business as usual. We cannot borrow for, so quite rightly we rate to do that. The other options are, in my mind, long term, and we do have the ability to utilise reserves and or borrow to achieve those outcomes. Today is the rainy day, whether it's this year and next year. Economic indicators say the next couple of years. We have a community that is socially and economically stressed and will be for some considerable time. So my contention is, if we do so choose to put money into a coastal plan, an extra 500,000, into trees, if we so choose, or climate change information, that we have that conversation at another time and borrow to do it. My argument today is not that we do not do it, but how we fund it in the interim. If I look at the ability of ratepayers to pay, if they are paying on an overdraft or a credit card, they're paying 7 to 20% if they have to borrow the money to pay their rates. We as an Environment Canterbury can borrow that money at 1.6% or 5% or thereabouts and spread over time, which provides equity. The coastal plan has a 10-year lifespan. It gives the ability of the community over time to pay for that rather than paying upfront. We do not need $500,000 tomorrow for it. We need to know that we can kickstart it and get it underway. Equally with the trees and the planting. I have a significant question in my mind as the chair of PAR, when I read the responsibilities in the terms of reference. And to paraphrase 5.1F, the PAR requirement is that budgets are systematically and rigorously analysed, and that we have not done that to date. We have not settled on what that planting program is. We have not settled on what the expenditure will be. So I am not sure as a chair of PAR that I can go forward and rate the ratepayer for something that we have not actually landed at this point in time. We are indicative in what we want to achieve, but we have not got those options nailed down. They are wants. Equally with the coastal plan, we have a budget to do a streamline. I accept the need for the further works. Again, we can start that work with the understanding that we can revisit our budgets and bring that information back to PAR and this council to borrow if required. So the difference for me in moving to a rate rise of around 3.1% is that we have the 2.3%, and I absolutely commend staff for bringing us back to that point and adding in the transport of 830. It is my belief that if we do require additional expenditure, that we can borrow for that. It is the cheapest form of providing those services, and we are doing the service of the community a good if we borrow rather than the community. So hence my amendment to move that figure back to 3.1% with the opportunity and the option to revisit through the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sunkel. Councillor Mackay, would you like to speak now, or would you like to reserve your right? Speak now, Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I definitely concur with everything Councillor Sunkel, as a mover of this amendment, has said. In addition, I would just like to go back to some of the points I made when I was discussing the previous amendment. This annual plan document went out for engagement. We are still able to do everything in it, in amongst the CPI figure of 2.3 plus the transport services that are now back in there. For me, adding on this extra 3 identified projects, particularly around the planting and regeneration, climate change engagement, and the coastal plan, is in addition to what went out in the annual plan discussion document. Therefore, we are effectively adding on extra rates. Don't be misled by the reduced figure. In fact, the ratepayers have actually paid forward for some of this work that is actually going to be occurring in this annual plan year that we're talking about of 2021. So to me, I see this as a rates rise for our ratepayers. With regard to the people that I represent in North Canterbury, particularly the Kaiapoi and Rangiora urban people who are being rated for new services in their bus, the express buses, that has caused quite a bit of feedback to us in the discussion document, I think I am quite comfortable with where we have landed there, that they are now being charged for about 6 months of the year. And that is solely due to the fact that the arterial route will be delayed in opening. But I do ask our organisation to communicate that very clearly. And then when we come to long-term plan discussions, that we look at how we can actually spread out that cost of that service, particularly if the economic and social disruption that is occurring now continues for the time frame that even central government is talking about of 5 years, and some of our economists out to 10 years. So I just would like to go back to the comments that I made before and just remind people that, as Councillor Sunkel said, the annual plan did have some funding in for the coastal plan. Yes, a lean version, I must admit, and any additional funding that has been tagged in this amendment is something that I see could be borrowed because it's intergenerational. The planting and regeneration, and that is an initiative I actually support, but we asked for feedback in our Better Futures discussion, so that is something for the long-term plan as I see it, and not something that we should be actually putting in to this annual plan. If we had an opportunity where some funding came and we could leverage from that, I'm very comfortable that we have the ability to borrow to fund that sort of thing. So I just want to make it clear that I do support the CPI plus the transport rate additions, service additions that we're looking at to make the 3.1% rate rise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackay. Can somebody just help me here? Who have we got speaking next? It looks like Councillor Ian McKenzie, is that correct? And then Councillor Scott. Councillor Ian McKenzie, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like the mover and seconder, I'd like to reinforce that we're in extraordinary times, and this is having a profound effect on our constituents and ratepayers. We have soaring unemployment, rock bottom confidence in the future going forward, uncertainty of the future, and what's worse is actually scared constituents in many places. And I'll remind this council that this crisis isn't resolved just because we're in level 2. It doesn't go away actually until we have a cure for this COVID virus, and that is not anytime soon. So it seems to me that as leaders we need to show empathy with our constituency. We should be taking no more money than absolutely necessary. We have in the past clearly rated more than we needed to because the Regional Council has a very sound balance sheet and substantial reserves. This was done prudently for that rainy day. It seems to me, with the uncertainties we're facing for the next at least 6 months until the world works out what the effect this bat disease is going to have on the economy and our society, we shouldn't be taking any more money from our constituents than necessary, and we should be using the reserves that we have put aside for such adverse events to help fund our projects. And I'd point out that even with running down some of our reserves, we'll still end up with over $11 million in cash reserves as an institution. And much has been made of the danger of climate change and the effects of flooding on our rivers and things. I'd also point out, in terms of catchment rating, we'll still end up with over $4.5 million in reserves, even if there is an adverse event on some of our catchments. So by doing this, we're not only maintaining our priorities and our core functions, we're maintaining a responsible and balanced and reasonably healthy balance sheet by advocating for the 2.3%. Like the mover of the motion, Councillor Sunkel, I agree that in fact there's been lack of debate about these three proposed projects. I have to say I'm not even sure what climate change engagement looks like, let alone whether we should be funding it to the tune of $150,000. And that is perhaps something we should be discussing as a council before we agree to fund it. I also, although I support and have actually buggered my back planting trees for the last 3 days in between meetings, support the tree planting program. My view is that when you plant a tree, this is for 100 years. So whether you do it this year or next year, it actually isn't critical to our outcomes. The critical outcome is that over the long term, we restore and manage our environment better than we have in the past. So there is no urgency for some of these things. And so, in conclusion, I would just like to say that it seems to me that it was to be responsible and empathetic and rational, to show responsible, empathetic and rational leadership, we should be limiting our rate rise to the 3.1% as this motion, as this proposed amendment proposes, to show a responsibility and empathy with our constituents who are facing the biggest financial and, for many, emotional challenges of their lives.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackenzie. I just remind councillors, if you want to speak, please put it in the chat so I'm clear. Councillor Scott, you are next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm reluctantly supporting this amendment because I don't think I will get the opportunity to talk to the 2.3% rate increase that I do support. My view is that we should have a 2.3 and reluctantly supporting, I guess, the 0.8 on top of that for regional for public transport. And the reason for that is, I guess, the passion that's been shown by my urban councillors and for that PT function in Christchurch to continue. And the comment also that was made that if we want to further PT and get on, we really need to come to the party and support it as best we can. So I support that 0.8. So I would just like us to look at paragraph 24 in the annual plan submission. We do not know what our end of the year budgets will look like now. There is some feeling that there will be excess money in some of those budgets. And 25, we're going in with a treasury policy in terms of changing our flexibility and our ability to borrow money at unprecedentedly low rates that we can get access to. As has been said, our balance sheet is strong, which is a great thing for us. And we have exceptional finance staff in terms of the job that they do for us and how they manage our funds and how they forecast where we stand. So I've got no fear that we can't manage our way through the next 12 months with what we have. And my final point on this is, at this time, money should be in the ratepayers' hands, where it will do the best good to be spent in the economy, rather than our bank. We need to have a tough year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. The next person on the list is Councillor Clearwater and then Councillor Hands.
I was happy to hear any other speakers.
Yes, I think so. Councillor Hands first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to speak for this amendment, and throughout our annual plan engagement, we've heard some excellent submissions from the public, and I want to start by congratulating those that took the time to provide feedback on the annual plan, particularly in this circumstances, and the feedback and ideas that we can take into the long-term plan discussions in future. It's really essential that our community provides us with this direction. As a result of COVID-19, the households and businesses of our region are experiencing or about to experience the greatest recession of our lifetimes. This is compounded by the reality that our region is still recovering from the Darfield, the Christchurch, and the North Canterbury earthquakes, as well as the Rangitata flood events. Many households have had and will continue to have significantly lower incomes than their normal wages. Many have lost or may still lose their jobs. While we don't have the regional figures, we know that 1.7 million New Zealanders have had their wages subsidised or paid for by the wage subsidy scheme in the last few months. The Canterbury region has already experienced, to the April 24 figures, a 0.9% lift in unemployment. All economic and financial commentators have warned that this will continue to rise for the foreseeable future. I'm also mindful that farmers within our region who have experienced drought and whom are also impacted by limitations on availability of the processes, markets and supply chains that usually operate are under considerable stress. I'm also cognizant of the mental health and social impacts of financial distress on our people in our community, and I do not wish to add to this with our rates increase. With that front of mind, I was really pleased that our staff managed to deliver some efficiencies that would allow us to deliver what we put forward in our annual plan for a 2.3% inflationary increase. This is not presented to us as an option within our papers today, unfortunately. I have considered the paper on public transport improvements, which adds to that 2.3% to allow for public plan public service improvements. That would take us to the rates increase of 3.1% that's on the table now. This will also help us with some of the constraints that we have as a result of COVID-19 with respect to capacity. Make no mistake that the 9.8% figure was a representation of the works that we can now complete for 2.3%. So I concur with Councillor Mackay's comments that anything more than a 3.1% rise would equate to an increase rather than a decrease on what we went to the community with. If we agree to additional rating for additional expenditure over and above what we engage with the community, that is an increase. To add additional expenditure over and above simply because we have managed to achieve the option of a much lower rates increase than originally anticipated in the consultation is, in my view, an insult to the ratepayer. This would also constitute adding additional projects we did not seek full public consultation for. These additional projects can be considered more fully and allow for a much more developed and sustainable approach of funding them and their merits on the completion of that through the LTP process, which we have already commenced. I understand the hesitation of others about not choosing to replenish reserves at this time. However, on balance, like Councillor Sanko, I liken the situation of us taking from our ratepayers' back pocket, possibly from their credit cards, to place into our savings account in case we might need it. This is the rainy day that our reserves are designed for. And as Councillor Sanko said, we also have the ability, and Councillor Scott said, to borrow at a much, much lower rate than our ratepayers can. In my view, adding additional expenditure and taking from the ratepayer to replenish those reserves, when our reserves are designed for that, and we can borrow for much lower than them, is just simply nonsensical. I'm disappointed we began this debate today with a motion that specifies a preference for the staff recommended option. I'd like to have that on record without there having the ability to have a democratic debate on all of the options, and I feel very constrained having to debate amendments upon amendments. I do wish to have that procedural disappointment on record, but I will digress. I'd like to echo Councillor Scott's comments on that I'm speaking to this amendment because I fear we will not have the opportunity to debate the option 5 option, which is in our papers, due to the process. There's been much celebration about a return to a fully elected council. With that comes a renewed requirement for public accountability on rates expenditure. This is highlighted no more than now as we consider the options before us as the economic reality for our community is setting in. For that reason, I move that we accept a rates increase of 3.1%, which will include the public transport service improvements, and then we will move to the later amendments to our finance policy. It is, in my view, absolutely essential that we keep the rates rise on our community as low as practically possible and in line with the level of service that we outlined in our engagement document, which we can now deliver for 2.3 or 3.1%. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hands, for that very good speech. Who have we got next? We don't seem to have anybody.
Councillor Clearwater.
Oh, Councillor Clearwater. Oh, sorry, I don't think
Councillor Pauling has.
Councillor Pauling following but we go back now. Is there anybody else? Yeah, we've got Councillor Clearwater, Councillor Pauling, and then Councillor Marshall. So Councillor Clearwater first, please. No one could hear me. Sorry, it's Councillor Clearwater first, and then we've got Councillor Pauling and Councillor Marshall, and Councillor Southworth, and Councillor Edge, and Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie. So over to Councillor Clearwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, I think the whole purpose of setting an annual plan is to create a clear direction for the people who submit it to us and all of our ratepayers, as well as the Environment Canterbury organisation. I think people need to know what direction Environment Canterbury is heading. I think we heard very clearly at the time of the submissions that in fact people were very concerned about some of the issues, including public transport actually. But, you know, to hear today that there's no urgency for some of those, like climate change, well, actually try and tell that to our children and grandchildren. There is urgency around these. That is a good example of where we, as elected members, need to make it really clear that we're not just, you know, putting up some kind of wonderful statement that we see as urgent. We actually need to put our money where our mouth is, and we need to plan for it now. So, and like I think the point about ratepayer stress has been well referred to and well covered earlier. No one should have to suffer any increased rent payments if in fact they are in financial difficulty, and there are clear ways to circumvent that. I just think that altogether, you know, if there was an indication that in practice that the process that has been taken by the approach that's been taken by the previous decision that we made earlier, that it's insulting. Well, actually, I think it's more insulting to not listen to the people who came to tell us very clearly about their concerns. So I urge all of us as councillors to think again, that in fact to take stock. In fact, we are here to make decisions, not just to keep on postponing them, because guess what? Climate change is actually happening right now. And I urge you all to consider that and to vote against this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Clearwater. The next person in speaking order is Councillor Pauling. Sorry.
Kia ora, anō koutou. Just want to start by acknowledging the arguments from our councillors for this amendment around borrowing and concerns of hardship and reserves. These are things that we share with the people that have said that. But however, I believe that holding things off doesn't allow us to undertake and begin the important work we need to in a comprehensive way. I believe that the process we undertook, I believe in the process that we undertook, and via what we heard in the annual plan engagement. And it is critical that we listen to what we heard during this process and show that we have listened and responded. It also follows the considered advice of our staff for a 4% increase, but with clarity and intent that I think we owe to our community. That is all I'd like to say. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Pauling. The next person is Councillor Marshall, please.
Kia ora, Chair Huey. Like Councillor Pauling, I would like to show thanks and respect to all councillors who have spoken before me. And I'd just like to comment on some of the statements that were made. Acknowledging why that we're in a very exceptional circumstances is why our proposed annual plan increase has turned on its head, and that we're not repleting our reserves and we're instead using them. We're drawing down about a third of our reserves, though we will still have 11 million in reserves, as Councillor Mackenzie said. He also said that our times are going to get more interesting. So having that 11 million in the bank may be a given, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a given for the years to come. I'm very conscious that we do not create undue burden for those who are to come after us, and that we act on our legislative requirements now to provide for those people, such as doing our coastal plan in a timely manner and when it's well overdue, such as enhancing our climate change delivery and better coordinating our planting efforts, not creating new projects, but responding to what we already have and what we've heard through our annual plan submissions that the community wants us to do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Marshall. You'll be followed by Councillor Southworth, please.
Thank you. I would like to say thank you to the councillors who've spoken before, and I appreciate your support for public transport. That's something that we've talked about a lot around this table, and I appreciate that acknowledgement of the importance of it. For me, the coastal strategy is overdue. It wasn't done when the times weren't so rainy. And I think it's important that we do commit funds to doing this in a thorough way that recognises the latest science and information that we have with respect particularly to coastal hazards and to marine biodiversity. COVID-19 impacts are going to be with us for some years to come, and we can't just keep off-putting these important plans that help us to prepare ourselves for the climate change effects that are also to come and will also impact significantly. For me, the fact that the impacts are going to be most borne by people who have least responsibility for them means that we need to be paying for these things through our rates and not borrowing for them. I completely appreciate borrowing for flood events. If those worst things happen, we have the access to low rates, and for that I'm comfortable with that. It's a rainy day, we can take some risks on that. But the tree planting, again, whilst I acknowledge that that's something that does have a generational benefit, at the same time, it was really strongly supported by the submitters on our annual plan, and it also represents an increased employment opportunity. And so I would like to see that also committed to through our rates here. So in summary, I would like to see the original amendment, if I'm allowed to put it that way, supported and not this one.
Thank you, Councillor Southworth. The next speaker will be Councillor Edge, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too am against this proposed amendment. I support strongly the Council staff recommendation with those agreed amendments that Councillor Farm proposed and we agreed on a short time ago. Those by identifying those items rather than keeping them as a general reserve item really indicates to people that we are listening to them. They are intergenerational, they are regionally significant across the board, they are small transformational projects and gains that we need to really start the process of implementing now. We can't keep putting these things off. The coastal plan was put off by the previous council at the same time as it declared the climate change emergency. These things have to progress and we have to be visionary in what we're talking about. I absolutely understand the financial position that people are in, but the government is supporting all Kiwis in a big way, and Kiwis are responding to that whole process of the government empathy in what it's doing to support businesses, growth, and our health. And part of these things that we're suggesting have some certainty are to do with our health, our future health. And I want to remind councillors that just a week ago, when we saw the draft briefing paper. Those items related to the coastal plan and climate change public engagement were specifically identified in that paper. The paper that we've got now, and they were identified as options in that paper. The options we see before us still included those, but put them all into a general rate. So it is not a surprise option at all. And to say that we're constantly putting options in and out is incorrect. And the staff have taken on our comments from last week as well. So that's my comment. I think we need to progress with what we've been talking about.
Thank you, Councillor Edge. The next speaker will be Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie.
Yeah, so I would, I've got a bit of feedback here. Could someone turn off their mic? I'm speaking against this amendment for the following reasons. I would like to remind everyone that the verbal submissions on our annual plan were made after the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And despite that, many submitters said that they would still support a rates rise, specifically in relation to the 3 priority spending areas. So I don't think it's, given that they haven't changed their position on that, I think we're still in a strong position on a modest rates rise. Secondly, too much borrowing is very risky when we're going into a depression of this magnitude. There are many hidden risks. This depression could last beyond a few years, beyond what's being projected. Interest rates could rise and our ability to pay down debt could reduce. It is possible that a tipping point may be reached and we might be in a debt crisis. So I think we do need to be careful how much we borrow. And I feel that the rates rise we're looking for here is a good balance, a good compromise in that sense. Also, I think pulling rates down too low just to address the current pandemic is short-term thinking. And we need to think over the next, more than just the next few years. So yeah, we need to replenish our reserves because we don't face a stable future long term. So that's something that's the main reason that I would speak against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. I think we're up to Councillor John Sunkel now to ask. Oh, Councillor Farn. Sorry, it just came up. Thank you, Alam.
Thank you, Chair. I've just put speak against in terms of noting that I want to speak, but the main point that I wanted to clarify for all of Council is that we are in the amended position that we are currently at. We are not replenishing reserves. We are tagging specific projects in expenditure for priority items. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I think we're up to Councillor John Sunkel to speak and reply. Nobody else wants to speak? All right, I think we are, John. Thank you very much. That's right, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be brief. For me, this is a debate about how we fund those options and projects. And I genuinely asked the question, have we tested those options and expenditures and projects? And I believe we have not. So putting my technical hat on, my risk hat on it in that audit committee, I don't believe that we have probably followed the proper process. So I put that question to you as councillors. I am not saying that we should not or would not. I hear your wish for certainty. I am looking for the opportunity of flexibility To the question of trees equals jobs equals recovery, I believe as a council that we would look to borrow money on recovery projects and not treat them as business as usual. So not quite sure I agree that the planting of trees is an opportunity for jobs and recovery. And yes, we have had 160 something people submit to us on the annual plan, and a significant number of people have looked at the future. And I understood that some of these projects would be future focused through long-term plan. So when we only have a few hundred people involved out of 630 or 50,000 people, I also have to accept those people that speak to us privately and are our constituents and bring a constituency view. So the question of headroom and borrowing $1 million here or there, I would in normal stances say I agree with you, but I absolutely accept that these are exceptional times and that we need to look after our ratepayers as others who have spoken in favour of this debate. So I shall leave it there in the conclusion. For me, this is about how we fund projects and how we assess them rather than not do them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sunkel. Now I think we're up to the stage where we have to put the resolution that you moved in amendment, which I'm referring to as the John Sunkel 3.1% amendment, which was seconded by Councillor Mackay. All those in favour, please say aye.
Jenny,
Am I doing something wrong?
Yes, can we use the chat in please for the ayes?
Oh, put your eyes in the chat, please. I think everybody is. Just hang on a minute while the council secretary and gets this organised for us. Thank you. All those people who are against, please put yours into the chat.
So 7 against and 5 for, so it's lost.
So that amendment is lost, 7 against and 5 in support. So now we move back to the substantive motion, which is, where have we got it here?
Yes, we do.
We do need to amend this system so we have it coming up on the screen somehow, don't we? So are we all clear that we're putting forward the option 4 with the amendments proposed by Councillor Lahn and which was agreed to earlier, where we remove the general reserve allocation and confirm specific project funds to be allocated 0.5%, 500k for coastal plan, 0.15%, 150,000 for climate engagement program, and 0.25%, 250,000 for the Mi'ururaku recommendation. Confirm PT service improvements amount $893,000.60 for Waimakariri 1 month delay. So is everybody clear? Oh, minus, is it? It is supposed to be minus. I agree. Minus. So that is moved by that was passed. So that's now becomes the substantive motion. So yes, I'm going to put the substantive motion. All those in favour. Is there something wrong, Councillor?
Sorry, a question about clarification, because the motion, the recommendation from the staff is that we would agree on the option. And I'm just wanting to make sure that in fact agreement means that it gets sufficient support, or whether in fact we need to change that word to decides.
You've made a very good point, and thank you very much for assisting us here. That means that the resolution is actually going to read that the council directs staff to bring forward a 4% option for total rates in a reserve, which then includes the original in the report, as stated in the report under option 4, including the amendment that I just read, which became the substantive motion.
Can we have the motion put, the substantive motion put up in its entirety on the screen so we are absolutely clear as to what we're voting on?
What we're doing is we're going to get this written down so we're absolutely clear what it says, and we'll get that put up on the screen. So just bear with us for a minute. Actually, I just seek some advice from Miles. Would you like to just come up here a minute so we get this right, please? I think we'll just adjourn the meeting for a minute while we seek this advice, please. So we're just adjourning for a moment. Thank you. Adjournment. Now is time to shut the doors and lock down the chamber and get back onto it. That means everybody please be quiet. So Cindy has very assisted us, and Miles assisted us as well. And thank you to Councillor Ian Mackenzie for stating what I should have done myself. That's very good. Thank you for your help. That in the resolution is that, and it's all in the meeting chat for people to see, that the council directs staff to bring forward a 4% total rates revenue increase, which includes the 2.3% sustainable baseline consumer price index CPI type increase, plus the staff recommendation in the public transport supplementary paper of 0.76%, with the balance being allocated to 500,000 for the Coastal Environment Plan, 150,000 for the Climate Engagement Program, and 250,000 for Me Ururaku. And that is it. That's the whole resolution. That is now the substantive resolution. It was moved by Councillor. It's moved by me, isn't it? It's moved by me and seconded by Councillor Farn. We'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye in the chat. All those against, please say no in the chat. Please just bear with us while Cindy helps us out in her role as Council Secretary in the chamber, and we have Louise as Council Secretary at home. That's very historical, isn't it? Thank you so much, Louise. I declare that resolution carried 5, 4 and is it 4 against?
Yeah, and 7, oh sorry.
7 to
4,
5.
Yeah. And
7, 4 and 5 against, and I see that.
noted the councillors who wish their votes against recorded.
Yes, I would like to see that. There's
Okay.
Councillor Mackay, Councillor Scott, Councillor Ian McKenzie, Councillor Megan Hands and Councillor John Sunkel would like their vote against recorded. Thank you very much, everybody. Well, thank you very much for all working together using that formal process to get where we want to. So congratulations to everybody. Councillor Phil Clearwater.
I know, I was just simply going to reiterate what you said yourself, Jenny, and thanking the staff, particularly, well, all the staff, but particularly those who have been here today and have worked through this with us, like Stephanie and Cindy and Miles, of course, and other senior staff. So thank you very much. I know that's from all of us, but you mentioned that earlier, Jenny.
Thank you very much. We'll move on now. And do I need to do something else? No, I just yes, I'm just going to do them. Thank you for reminding me. It's really helpful. I appreciate it. I hadn't forgotten that time. Recommendation 3, if you remember, the recommendations are on page 15. The next recommendation refers the liability management and investment policy to the performance audit and risk committee for that committee to review the policy to ensure appropriate flexibility exists to borrow for projects or operating expenditure needs that may emerge. And yes, Councillor John Sunkel's moved that. Who's going to second it? We got Councillor Hands. Councillor Hands will second that. Is there any points for clarification on that resolution? No, then we'll just put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please record if you're against. Put it in the meeting chat. I don't see anybody being against. 6, 7, we've got 8 ayes so far. Yeah, 9. Yeah, that is carried. So I'll declare that carried. Now we're on to recommendation 4, are we? Recommendation 4 is that directs that the acting chief executive is to complete the finished document and the associated rating resolutions for the annual plan 2020/21 ready for the council adoption on the 18th of June 2020. I'll call for a mover. Who is going to move that? Councillor Craig Pauling will move that, seconded by Councillor Phil Clearwater. I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, please record your vote against. I don't assume there's anybody voting against, so I'll declare that carried. I do really want to thank everybody. That was a lengthy debate, and it only works if everybody follows the standing orders. So it was really a pleasure to be the chair during this process, because it actually did work really well, and I'm really excited about it, because I think that is what makes local government so exciting. We need to all be frank, state our opinions. There's 14 of us. It's a unique situation. We need to make ourselves satisfied and make decisions. So congratulations, everyone. But in particular, it's congratulations to all the staff, because as other councillors have said along the way, and I thought that was lovely, it is really hard work that you're doing for the public good. So I want to say thank you very much for working in the public sector and for being so committed to the Canterbury Regional Council. Our community really is indebted to you for doing this fantastic work. So thank you very much. I think it's fantastic. And I want to thank the community as well, all those individuals and the organisations that came forward, and encourage more people in the future to come forward and talk to us and write to us and engage with us, because that is democracy in action. Thank you very much. Now we're on to a little bit more formal meeting procedure. We're on to number 7, exclusion of the public. Call for a mover and seconder. in this area, the public, we need someone to move that we move into public excluded. I think that I see Councillor Marshall, seconded by Councillor Claire Mackay, moving and seconding that we move into public excluded. All those in favour, please say aye. Anyone against, please say. There's no one being against. I declare that carried. John, do you want to again? We need another resolution. This is that the council confirms an open meeting the decision of the 21st of April to appoint Stephanie Rixeder as acting chief executive from the 2nd of May 2020 until the date on which a permanently appointed chief executive commences employment. Who's going to move that? Is someone? Councillor Pauling has indicated that he'll move, seconded by Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you very much. Against, there's nobody that can be against. That's a bit silly. It's not 500 years ago with the Tower of London or something. Anyway, it's moved and seconded. I'll put that to the vote. All please say aye. Thank you. No one against, and that's carried. Thank you very much, and thank you, staff, for reminding us that we needed to do that, because sometimes the auditors can get really thingy about this stuff, so we need to do it. Other businesses. Is there any other business? Nobody's advised me they have any other business. Number 9, notice of motion. I have had no notices that there's a notice of motion, and if you follow that process in the standing orders, you have to go through a particular process, and so just note that if anyone wants to use that provision. No, there's no questions. They're usually on notice as well. Next meeting is Thursday the 18th of June. I'd like to invite Councillor Pauling to please close this meeting with a karakia. Thank you very much, Councillor Pauling. All right.
Kia ora tātou. Se tuatahi, hei mihi nui kia koutou I tēnei rā. Ai ki ngā memo o te hāpori, ai e tonu kia mātou, ai tēnei mahi, tēnā koutou. Ai ki ngā kaimahi, tēnā koutou anō mō koutou mahi uaua, ai tēnei wā, I tēnei kaupapa. Ai ki ngā kai kaunihera nei. Ai he tō mahi I tēnei rā, I tērā marama, ai tēnei timi ki a koutou. So I just wanted to stand first before closing and acknowledge everybody again. It's been a long day, so I won't take too long, but just reaffirming our thanks to the community, to our staff, and to our councillors. And I just wanted to end with the karakia. That's not in our booklet, but it's sort of it's something that I have mentioned previously. And so I'm going to translate it line by line so that you can understand it. He waka eke no. We are in this waka together. He waka ko tuia ka hore e tutukuna ki ka mira. A waka that is interlaced so that it will not be separated. He moana puki e ekia I te waka that can be navigated over the choppiest oceans. He ihu waka, he ihu whenua, and can reach the shore safely. Ka hoi kotahi ki te taha tū o te raki. Paddle as one to the horizon and seek out further horizons. Ko te pai pāwhiti, whaia kia tata. Ko te pai tata, whakamaua kia tina. Find it, fix it, and affirm that which you hold dear. Haumi e, hui e, tae hi. Kia ora koutou.
Thanks very much. And just before we leave the room, sorry to speak harsh, but there needs to be an announcement from the CEO.
We've officially ended the formal meeting. This is simply to let you know that the freshwater portfolio has been postponed.